A 14-year-old boy lifts a dead man's head. 1 second later, burst. Blood and pus spill over his fingers. That night, something crawled into his bed. It grabbed his skull and slammed it again and again into the bamboo. It didn't just disturb the dead, he woke something that wanted revenge. This isn't a horror movie. This is the real story of a boy raised in a funeral home, and the one spirit he couldn't put to rest. Let's dive into this chilling tale, only on Uncle Hollow NX. The Tran family wasn't like most households in their quiet southern Chinese town. While others worked in markets or managed rice fields, the men in this family built coffins and managed funerals. It was a legacy passed down for 3 generations, from hand-carved woodwork by the grandfather to full-service funeral arrangements led by the father, Tran Lao Ku. And at 14, Tran Hao, thin, observant, quiet, already knew more about death than most grown men. He didn't learn from books. He learned from following, from watching his father adjust incense sticks at dawn, from folding white mourning cloth, from helping line coffins with red silk. While other kids memorized schoolwork, Hao memorized rituals. But all those years of quiet learning did not prepare him for what would happen one summer night, when a simple misstep, a slip of a hand during a routine ritual, would open the door to something he couldn't explain and would never forget. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. It began with a man who had died in the most brutal way, a blow to the back of the head during a drunken brawl. His body arrived at the Tran household wrapped in a thin, stained sheet. The family wanted him buried in dignity. Since he was male, Hao was assigned the task of dressing the body. He had done this before. There was no fear, just steps. Fold the arms, button the shirt, straighten the collar. But as he lifted the head to adjust the shirt from behind, he felt it. A soft squish, a rotten give, and then something tore open. While most boys in town spent their weekends kicking balls or catching fish, Tran Hao spent his shadowed afternoons surrounded by incense, chanting monks, and grieving families. From the age of 5, he followed his father to funerals, not out of curiosity, but because it was simply their way of life. When there was a funeral, the Tran household didn't cook. His father would slip his mother a few yuan and say, "Go buy something simple, we'll eat at the wake." And so they did. Some wakes had simple bowls of congee, others, especially when the family was well off, offered full meals, braised duck, dumplings, sweet rice cakes. No one questioned their presence. Everyone in the village knew the boy was the son of the coffin master. A bowl of rice, a pair of chopsticks, no one minded sharing. Over time, Hao became more than a silent shadow. At age 7, he helped fold mourning sashes. At 8, he started arranging incense bowls. By 10, he could recite the steps of a Taoist farewell ritual better than some grown men. He didn't play games. He polished wood. He didn't draw cartoons. He memorized dates and death hours. At first, he only followed, but as he got older, the funerals followed him. One time, an elderly woman collapsed and died suddenly. Her family panicked. They had no plan, no money, nothing. They came running to Tran Lao Ku begging for help. Hao watched as his father cursed them, loudly, viciously. "Do you think we run a temple here? Do I look like a charity?" But later that night, when no one was watching, the father quietly carried over a plain pine coffin and set it at their doorstep. That's how things worked in their home. The old man's tongue was sharp, his words could cut, but his hands always gave more than they kept. To Hao, these contradictions weren't confusing, they were natural. He grew up knowing that death wasn't frightening. Poverty was. Loneliness was.
A good coffin was not about luxury. It was about dignity. And in their home, dignity was something they gave, even if it meant skipping dinner. The man arrived just before sundown. His body was wrapped in a gray hospital sheet, thin enough to show the outline of his limbs. A tight stitch ran down the back of his skull, hastily sewn after a fatal brawl. The official report said he was struck with a bottle, twice. Tran Hao didn't flinch. He had seen worse. Inside the small Temliam room behind their house, his father prepped the space with calm precision. Incense, bowl of salt, clean linens, ritual oil. Since the deceased was male, Hao was given the task of dressing him. He had done it before. He didn't mind. The family handed him a dark blue silk shirt and charcoal trousers, freshly ironed, the scent of detergent still lingering. Hao started from the bottom. Socks, pants, belt, then the shirt. Everything went smoothly until the collar. To button it neatly, Hao needed to lift the man's head. He reached under the neck, bracing the weight, and gently pulled upward. At first, it felt normal, firm, cold. But as his fingers shifted higher, he felt something wrong. The back of the skull. It gave in. Soft, unstable. And then, pop. The stitch burst open. A wet, sickening splash filled his palm. It wasn't just blood. It was pus, mucus, rot. He froze. A thick, putrid smell hit him all at once, like spoiled meat left in the sun. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, "What the hell did you do?" His father stormed in, his eyes blazing. Hao was still holding the man's head, his hand trembling, dripping. I was just fixing the collar." "You call this fixing?" The old man snatched a towel and began wiping the mess. "There are people outside. The family is waiting. You want them to see this?" Hao stood there, frozen. Shame burned his face. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His father didn't slap him, but the words cut deeper. "You've been around the dead your whole life. How can you be so careless now?" The anger in his voice wasn't just frustration, it was fear. Not for the body, but for what might follow. In their world, disrespecting the dead, even by accident, was no small thing. Later that night, Hao washed his hands for the 5th time. The smell wouldn't leave, neither would the image. And somewhere in his chest, a heaviness began to grow. He had seen many corpses, but this time it felt like one had seen him. That night, Tran Hao couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt it, the weight of the man's head in his hands, the sudden collapse, the warm gush of rot. He kept replaying the moment, trying to convince himself it was just bad stitching, just a medical mistake, just anatomy. But when the sun rose, things didn't get better. The next afternoon, as he carried a folded stool across the backyard, his foot caught onto something invisible. He fell hard, scraping his elbow on the gravel. There was no branch, no tool, nothing in the way. That evening, the funeral crew gathered to begin digging the grave behind the deceased's house. The family had chosen a late-night burial time, an unusual hour, but one approved by the temple monk. To light the space, Hao's father stretched a single power cord all the way from the house, attaching one lone bulb above the burial spot. It flickered, but held. The men worked quietly, their shovels striking the soil in a steady rhythm. Hao stood nearby, folding cloths, sweeping. Then, darkness. The bulb went out without warning. "Who turned off the power?" one of the diggers shouted. "Get it back on! We can't see a damn thing down here!" Hao looked toward the house. The cord was still connected. Confused, he started running. The path was short, only a dozen steps, but halfway there he felt something hit his shin, hard. He tripped, crashed to the ground, and rolled onto his side. His knee throbbed, his shoulder burned, and worst of all, his head had hit something metal. He reached up. blood.
When he looked behind him, there was nothing. No shovel, no rake, no rock. The others yelled again, "Hurry! We need light!" He staggered to his feet, found the outlet near the back window, and shoved the plug back in. The bulb above the grave flickered back on. Back down the path, the men resumed digging. No one had seen what happened. No one believed him when he tried to explain later. "Probably a root," one said. "Clumsy," another muttered. But Hal knew what he felt, and he knew what he heard. Because in that 1 second, just before his foot struck, he heard breathing. Not heavy, not panicked, but slow, angry, and it was right behind him. The third night, it followed him home. Tran Hao had been quiet all evening. He barely touched his dinner. He kept replaying the graveyard fall, the breathing, the sting on the back of his head. By midnight, he was in bed, alone in his small room, walled by a faded curtain instead of a door. His bed frame was made of bamboo, creaky and fragile. Every movement made a sharp creet, creet, creet sound. He slept on his side, facing the wall. And then he heard it. Creet. Someone had stepped onto the bed. Creet. Another shift. Closer. He turned. There was someone sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed. A man, shoulders hunched, hands resting on his knees. Silent, still, and staring straight at him. Hal's heart seized. At first, he thought it was his father. "Bah," he whispered. No reply. "Why are you—" Before he could finish, the man lunged. Two cold hands grabbed his head and slammed it into the bed. Thud, thud, thud. Over and over again. The bamboo gave way slightly each time, bouncing his skull back up like a drum. He couldn't scream, couldn't move. The hands were strong, impossibly cold. The pressure on his chest was suffocating. He gasped, but the air didn't come. And then the face came close. So close he could see the texture of the skin, the sunken eyes, the crooked brows, the half-open mouth twisted in pain. It was him. The man from the Tumlium room. The one with the burst stitches. The one he had dropped. Their eyes locked. And then everything went black. Hal woke to his father shaking him, voice panicked. "What's wrong?" The curtain had been pulled back. The room was empty. He was soaked in sweat. His chest heaved. The bamboo frame creaked beneath him. He wanted to speak, but his throat burned. He pointed to the foot of the bed. "He was here. He was right there." His father said nothing at first, then turned away, gritting his teeth. "Go wash your face. Don't sleep here tonight." 2 days later, they returned to the gravesite. The burial was set for sunrise, but the grave was still not finished. Arguments over placement had delayed everything. So that night, Tran Hao, his father, and 3 hired diggers came back to finish the job. It was almost 9 p.m. The air was thick, humid. A single extension cord stretched from the house, powering one dim yellow bulb that swung above the half-dug hole. The field was quiet. Too quiet. Even the crickets had stopped. Hal lingered at the edge, watching shadows move under the bulb. The light swayed, casting distorted silhouettes on the ground like dancing ghosts. He didn't say much. He was still shaken from the night before. One of the men wiped his forehead and pointed toward Hao. "Go fetch the folding shovel from the shed." Hao nodded and jogged up the path toward the house. 10 meters in. Darkness. The light behind him vanished. The grave went black. "What the hell?" someone shouted. "Get the power back!" Hao spun around. The plug must have come loose. He picked up speed. Then something slammed into his shin. He tripped, hard. His foot struck something solid, like a branch or pipe. He hit the dirt, face first, and rolled. The wind rushed out of his lungs. And then, crack. Pain exploded in the back of his skull. It felt like something had struck him. Not the ground, not an accident.
A hand, a blunt force. He gasped, clutching the spot. When he sat up, the plug was lying beside him, unplugged, still swinging. Someone or something had just pulled it out. He looked back toward the house. No one. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. He plugged the cord back in, the bulb blinked back on. The field lit up again, diggers resumed working. He walked slowly back down the path, rubbing his head, still throbbing. He didn't say a word, but as he passed the grave, he looked up. One of the shadows hadn't moved. It stood, motionless, just beyond the edge of the light. Not digging, not speaking, not even blinking, just watching. And in the stillness, Hao finally understood. This wasn't about guilt. This was a warning. The next morning, Tran Hao was burning with fever. His forehead was soaked in sweat. He hadn't eaten since the night of the dream, if it was even a dream. The back of his head still throbbed from the fall. His eyes were sunken, lips dry. His mother thought it was exhaustion. His father knew better. They didn't talk much that day. By the fourth morning, Hao could finally sit up. He ate porridge in silence, and when he finished, his father handed him a pair of sandals. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going back." Hao didn't ask where. He already knew. They walked the narrow path behind the house. The graveyard was still damp from last night's rain. The earth was dark, soft, quiet. His father held 3 sticks of incense. Hao walked beside him, head down. At the tombstone, his father handed him the incense. "Bend down," he said. Hao knelt. His hands trembled as he lit the tips, waited for the smoke to rise, and placed them into the incense jar before the gravestone. He bowed 3 times. "Say it," his father said. Hao whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to help. I didn't know." His voice cracked. The wind blew. The incense flame trembled. And then his father stepped forward. He didn't kneel. He pointed straight at the stone. "He told you that night. I told you we gave you everything. A proper ritual, a respectful burial, a coffin I discounted out of pity. You think my son deserved what you did to him?" His voice rose. "You think bruising his skull, dragging him out of sleep, choking him with fear, you think that's justice?" He took a deep breath. His eyes were wild. "Listen to me. You already died once. Don't make me bury you again. If you show your face in my home one more time, I'll seal this grave so tight, not even your shadow will find its way out." He turned, grabbed Hao by the arm, and pulled him away. Neither of them looked back. That night, the house was silent. No creaking bamboo bed, no whispering voices, no shadows at the foot of the curtain. And for the first time in days,
Tran Hao slept through the night. From that day forward, the house felt different. There was no ceremony, no chanting monk, no talisman on the door, just a boy, a father, a grave, and words not meant to be repeated. But somehow, it was enough. The fever broke. Hao Tran began eating again. His hands stopped shaking. He stopped glancing over his shoulder at night. And more importantly, nothing strange happened. No shadows, no footsteps, no unplugged lights or invisible hands. It was as if the wind had shifted. His mother noticed too. She didn't say anything, but began placing bowls of rice on the family altar again. Quiet gestures, respectful ones. The Tam Liam room, once filled with dread, returned to routine. Linens were folded, incense replaced. The scent of old wood, of smoke and soap filled the space again. But Hao moved differently now. Slower, more deliberate. He didn't avoid his duties. In fact, he asked to be involved more. But he no longer treated the dead as assignments. He began to speak to them. Before lifting a hand, he'd whisper, "Forgive me." Before dressing a body, "I'll be gentle."
Before closing a lid, "Rest well." His father noticed, didn't comment, just watched. Because in this family, lessons weren't taught, they were inherited. Weeks later, the family returned to the graveyard to tidy the site. Tran Hao brought fresh flowers. His father lit incense. They stood side by side for a long time. The wind rustled the trees. The smoke curled upward and vanished. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence itself felt full, like a door had finally closed, softly, without sound. Not locked, just respected. It was late, past midnight, when Tran Hao found his father sitting alone by the family altar. The room was dimly lit by 2 red lanterns. A faint trace of incense smoke lingered in the air. The floor creaked as Hao stepped closer. His father didn't look up. "Sit," he said. Hao obeyed. They sat in silence for a while, side by side. Then, softly, the old man spoke. "You've seen what happens when you handle the dead like they're just bodies." Hao nodded. "They remember," his father continued. "Even if the soul leaves, the spirit stays. Sometimes to watch, sometimes to wait, sometimes to test you." He turned to his son, eyes sharp, even in the dim light. "Never forget, you are not the last person they see by accident. You are chosen, trusted. If you mess that up, you're not just disrespecting them, you're inviting them." Hao swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to." "I know," his father cut in, "but spirits don't care about intentions. They care about how you act." He leaned forward, lit a fresh stick of incense, and held it between his fingers. "This isn't a job, son. It's a duty." Hao looked at the old photos above the altar, grandfather, great-grandfather, all in funeral robes, all staring forward with solemn eyes. "How did you learn this?" he asked. His father smiled faintly. "By messing up, just like you." Then he handed the incense to Hao. "Go place it," he said, "and thank them, all of them. Every name on that altar gave you this life." Hao stood up, stepped forward, and placed the incense into the holder. He bowed once, then again, and again. 3 bows, 3 breaths, 3 silent promises. To be careful, to be kind, to never treat the dead like they were already forgotten. Years passed. Tron Hao grew taller, quieter, steadier. His hands, once clumsy and nervous, now moved with calm precision. He dressed bodies with care, arranged incense with symmetry, folded mourning cloth with reverence. He never rushed, never cut corners, and he never forgot. Every time he entered the Tom Lim room, he paused before beginning. He bowed his head, whispered a few words, and treated every stranger on the table like they were family. The villagers noticed. They said he was gifted, too young to be that good. But it wasn't a gift. It was a lesson burned into his bones. Once, during a funeral for an elderly woman, her granddaughter pulled Hao aside. "She looks so peaceful," she whispered, "like she's really sleeping." Hao nodded quietly. "She was your last," the girl added, "your last person you'll prepare today." He paused. "No," he said. "She's the only one." In the quiet corners of his mind, the memory of that summer never faded. The night the head split open, the grave gone dark, the bed that creaked, the shadow that stared. He never told the full story, not to friends, not to the monks, not even to the neighbors who respected him so much. But every now and then, when he folded a collar or lifted a cold hand, he'd hear a breath behind him, and he'd smile, not in fear, but in understanding. Because in this world, where death often comes without warning, some of the most important lessons come from those who can no longer speak. And if you're lucky enough to survive them, you don't forget, you grow. We often think death is the end, but in many cultures, especially in Asia, death is just the beginning of something else, a transition, a test, a question of how the living will remember and how the dead will respond.
This story isn't just about fear. It's about responsibility. Tron Ha wasn't cursed. He wasn't chosen by fate. He made a mistake, one any of us could have made, and paid the price with fear, shame, and sleepless nights. But through it, he gained something many people never do: respect for the unseen. In a world driven by speed and convenience, we forget that dignity doesn't end when life does. How we treat the vulnerable, even in death, says everything about who we are. Hao's father wasn't a priest. He wasn't wise in words, but he taught his son one timeless truth: the dead don't ask for much, but if you treat them like they're nothing, they'll remind you they were someone. If this story haunted you, moved you, or made you think, don't leave without letting us know. What do you believe happens when someone dies with unresolved anger? Comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe now. Tomorrow's video is even more unsettling. You won't want to miss it. Like the video if it gave you chills. Share it with someone who needs to respect the dead a little more. Because on Uncle Hollow NX, we don't just tell stories, we pass on warnings.